So, welcome everybody to Video Game Preservation Practices and Approaches, an online symposium. Um, this is the second event in this kind of mini series that has been set up by myself. I'm Dr. Jack Orchard, and I work with the Centre for Digital Scholarship at the Bodleian Libraries in Oxford. And this has been coined by myself and Kat Dickinson, who works for Digital Scholarship at Oxford. Two distinct but very similarly named institutions in a very Oxfordy way. And essentially, last year, we organised an event of the same name, an in-person event aimed at communicating some kind of key ideas about game preservation to a kind of non-specialist audience, for which we enlisted Emily Marlowe, Will Butler, and Alex Habgood of Rebellion Studios to give talks. We made the event hybrid, and we were very, very surprised to see that our kind of general audience facing event was attracting audiences from around the world, from kind of very, very specialist fields of game preservation, representatives of the Video Game History Foundation, various video game museums and libraries, and many, many more. So we've re-enlisted Emily and Will to make this online symposium, which is essentially taking the next step in the conversation. So it's moving into a more specialist approach where we can kind of take some of the foundational principles of game preservation, its importance and kind of essential ideas, and move on to the next step of thinking about primarily video game preservation in relation to different types of institutions that are kind of interested in this space. So we've got our panel sessions and our keynote presentation all focused on kind of different elements of this. I'd like to, from the off, just thank Will, Emily, and Kat for helping to put this all together. And you'll be hearing from me, Emily, and Will, and Kat will be the silent presence in the background for the whole day. So just a few housekeeping rules. Let me get rid of that and that. We've gone for a Zoom call rather than a Zoom webinar, so we can have a bit more kind of freedom of communication, but your cameras and microphones will be automatically muted and turned off when you join, and please keep them so during the presentations. Do feel free to keep chat going during the Zoom call. We will basically we'll be keeping an eye on the chat as the presentations unfold, and if you would like a question to be presented to the speaker during Q&A at the end of the session, if you could put Q : and then your question, then we will know to find it in the chat at the end. Also at the end, people who like to come up on camera and ask their questions directly will also have an opportunity. Just say that you would like to do so, and we will catch you. Any technical issues or welfare concerns, you can email Digital Scholarship at humanities@ox.ac.uk, or tag Digital Scholarship at Oxford in the Zoom chat. That's Kat, basically. Also, I should just mention with the chat, we would love to have a sort of ongoing conversation during the day. But also we are currently working on establishing a Discord server within the British DIGRA Discord for hosting conversations around game preservation coming from this event. So after the event, we'll be sharing information about that. If, as we hope, people want to keep conversations going, there will be an avenue for that later. So also, the event is being recorded because we have such a profoundly international audience. Like, time zones are not going to fit everybody. We're going to have people kind of who can't make bits of it. So we are recording, and you'll have the recording shared with you after the event. And then finally, we have an official event hashtag, which we'd encourage everyone to use if they want to post on social media, which is hashtag VGPres26. That's Video Game Preservation 2026. We're on Blue Sky, but anyone who is also on Twitter, sorry, X, you feel free to also use that there. Okay, so I've got 5 minutes. So having just said that this is going to be a presentation, a series of panels and talks for which we can take a base knowledge of game preservation as read, I did just want to use my remaining 5 minutes of introduction to lay out basically all the things I told the speakers not to talk about, because we can assume everyone already knows. The biggest, hottest take in game preservation, it's important. We have our very, very well-known statistic, which has been explored multiple times, multiple different ways, of the 87% of video games pre-2009 now being inaccessible. We have the... I would like to acknowledge that this conference is dedicated to the memory of Highguard, which is being put to sleep as we speak, just as Concord was before it, and as I'm sure we will have generations of these terrible attempts to copy Fortnite collapsing in the future. We have the question of responsibility. Game preservation, this is the kind of the core take of this event, is these different types of institutions all treat game preservation in different ways and have kind of different preconceptions about what it means. So hopefully by pulling together kind of experts from these different fields, we can see some kind of commonalities and through lines. And then finally, we have, we have this question of transmediality, the idea of all of the different things that come around a game beyond the game itself. And certainly Emily's talk in our original foundational event for this series touched a lot on the kind of the paraphernalia and the peripheral materials around games as preserved objects at the National Video Game Museum. Then we have a series of paradoxes that kind of define what makes games complicated. So we have the fact that they are both art and product. And I'm sure we're going to hear more today about the conflict between the preservationist impulse and the commercial imperative to kind of maximize profits in remakes and remasters and things like that. It is both an artifact and a piece of technology. So here's where the kind of conversations about emulation and the kind of how important is hardware kind of comes up, because there's the preservationist impulse to a sort of material history, but then there is also the sort of the software that underpins it. which you can tell I'm not a specialist in this space because I'm wildly generalizing, but it's something to be considered. And then finally, we have the sort of participatory nature of it, like even sort of defining what a game object is in a world of kind of mods and fan expansions and edits and wikis and all sorts of material can be very difficult to conceptualize. And then here are just some people who are smarter than me who've talked about these ideas before. So Henry Lowood's kind of construction of the difference between perfect capture of data versus the kind of capture of the meaningful object. If you could exactly replicate a gameplay experience on a technical level, is that the same as replicating its kind of cultural function? James Newman's ideas about essentially the subject of preservation being play rather than the kind of the game itself, which is going to be a kind of a challenge and a provocation to a lot of the conversations today, I think. And then finally, on the more kind of technical level, Abigail Chapman's amazing article about metadata schemas in game preservation, which kind of compares the sort of fan-based ones with the various institutional ones, is a real kind of wake-up call for just how complicated trying to capture all of the different facets of a game can be. So I figured I'd give us a nice kind of base level. Now, you all know as much about video game preservation as, well, I do. We are, yes, I think we will take just a minute or so to set up the opening keynote, and then we can crack on. Okay, perfect. Melanie Swalwell is Professor of Digital Media Heritage at Swinburne University in Melbourne. Her research focuses on the creation, use, preservation, and legacy of complex digital artifacts, such as video games and media artworks. And she is the author of multiple books in this field, which I'm sure many of you will be familiar with. And she is going to be talking to us about ORS. Do you read it, or do you read the abbreviations? ORS, EAASI, from game preservation to software preservation. And thank you very much. Take it away.
Thank you, Jack. And thanks so much to the organisers. I am coming to you tonight from Melbourne, from the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. So I'd like to begin by paying respects to elders past and present. I am really honoured to be able to speak with you tonight and to share the work that I've been engaged in with a team of really wonderful and talented colleagues for the last 20 and a bit years. It really is that long. So I'm really pleased to have the opportunity to share that with you. I am a media studies academic, and over the last 20 years, I've led several research projects to investigate and develop methods to research game history and preservation. These projects have very much been team sports. So this is a picture of the very first linkage project that I led called Play It Again back in 2014, and I managed to bring along the team of people that I worked with in New Zealand on the very first pilot project, which was focused on games for the Sega SC3000 at my university, Victoria University of Wellington. I think it's fair to say these are thoroughly multidisciplinary teams. So we've got computer scientists, an IP lawyer, fan historians, a whole gamut of professionals from the GLAM sector. And we, I think, figured it out pretty early that it was going to take all these different forms of expertise and us all pulling together to really start to make some progress in this, on these quite wicked problems of preserving game software and undertaking game history research. So I think it's fair to say that we have pioneered multidisciplinary collaboration in game preservation in a research context. So we received this grant, our first ARC, the Australian Research Council funding, for this consortial game project focused on 1980s microcomputer games made in Australia and New Zealand. And it was a partnership in collaboration with the Australian Centre for the Moving Image, known as ACMI, and the then New Zealand Film Archive, now known as Ngā Sound and Vision, with support from our friends at the Berlin Computerspiel Museum. So the challenge, of course, in preserving games is to take content that's stored on obsolete storage media, which require obsolete computers and operating systems, and to turn it into something that we can meaningfully interact with. That also happens to be the case for many other forms of complex digital artifacts that have hardware and software dependencies. And so I wanted to show you just a brief video of what we can do now. This is a video of Gumboots, an Australian PC game from 1990 that is running on the Australian Emulation Network, available for visitors to ACMI to play on their own device when they're in the building and connected to the Wi-Fi. So the once too hard problem, you can see the operating system opening in the browser there, and then the game boots up and you can interact with it. So this sort of what seemed like it would be really, really tough and really a long way away back in 2005 is, for at least the 1980s and 1990s games that we've been working on, well on the way to being solved. Over the last 4 years or so, I've therefore been working to extend the arguments as to why we need to collect and preserve not just games, which are undoubtedly an important form of digital cultural heritage, but other forms of born digital cultural heritage more broadly. So in this talk, I'm going to narrate the collaborative journey that we've been on. I'm going to focus on the work since 2020 or so that we've been doing on Play It Again 2, a project focused on 1990s digital games, of which Gumboots is an example. The sister project, as we refer to it, called Archiving Australian Media Arts. I'll then go on to talk about the two LEAF projects. LEAF is a funding scheme in Australia, stands for Linkage Infrastructure, Equipment and Facilities, so it's a research infrastructure funding scheme, which have been responsible for rolling out the Australian Emulation Network, and these build on these two linkage projects, Play It Again and Archiving Australian Media Arts. Then we're going to offer up, I suppose, some ways to start what I'm calling, thinking of as building blocks for a future emulation network based on what we've learned that might be helpful to others who are interested in going that route. Okay, so let me wind back a little bit. The Australian Research Council has a funding scheme that's called the Linkage Scheme, and it requires that researchers have a partner organisation or organisations with which to collaborate. And all the projects I'm going to talk about are collaborations with such industry partners, most from the GLAM sector, that is the galleries, libraries, archives and museums sector. Such research projects require not just that we are engaging with an industry partner to, for instance, solve a problem, but that we are also creating new knowledge, because that is the definition of research. And so that's what our team has strived to do across these various linkage projects in our various disciplines and interdisciplines. On the humanities end, we've theorised how one might effectively gather the memories of those who first experienced the thrill of digital gaming with our articles on our participatory media project, the Popular Memory Archive. We've talked about the significance of playing an emulated game as opposed to the original experience, and the different perspectives that preservationists and game lovers who want to hark back to how it was in the original lead to, different positions that are different on that issue. And some of you might know of my history of the use of 1980s microcomputers in the home based on archival and contemporary interviews. So while I'm probably best known for this kind of work as a game historian, and I've got a slide here with some of my books. Whoops, I'm running behind with my slides. These are the linkage projects that I'm talking about. Play It Again 2 and Archiving Australian Media Arts, and I'll run through these partners in a little while. Here are some of my game history books. As the focus of today's event is on game preservation, I thought I would lean into that more. But before we do, I would like to say that as a game historian, the distinction between history and preservation is rather important to me. They're not the same thing. As I wrote in my essay moving on from the original experience in our Fans and Video Games anthology, game history is, or at the least can be, about much more than the games themselves, to wit, the social and cultural conditions extant at the moment of a game's production and or consumption. Preservation requires the game. Without it, there's nothing to preserve, obviously. History benefits from the availability of the game, but is not reducible to it. And we see this distinction in the fact that getting gumboots to run again does not tell you anything about what it meant for people to play it in 1990. Anyway, from 2020 to 2025, I led Play It Again, preserving Australian video game history of the 1990s. This project focused on the history and preservation of digital game titles developed in Australia in the 1990s, as well as some 1980s console titles that we had missed in the earlier Play It Again linkage project focused on microcomputer games. To give a very brief overview of the project, here are the aims. The first two tended to be the historically focused ones. We researched the production and reception histories of selected Australian video games of the 1990s. And here are some screenshots from one of the great games from this period, a full motion game by Beam Software called The Dame Was Loaded, and a still from Helen Stuckey's interview with David Giles and Mark Morrison with the script. We created a collection of 1990s Australian games for the Australian Centre for the Moving Image, ACME, and worked to ensure that through appropriate cataloguing, software preservation and emulation, these titles can be accessed in the future. We've collected 50 plus games. They may not be the best games you've ever played, but they are chosen to reflect the local game making culture of the era. And Helen Stuckey worked on the selection criteria for these 50 titles. They include some games that were only published in Australia, plus work that documents the local industry's reliance on the fee-for-service labour model, creating ports and shovelware, along with mods that were made in Australia, and attempts, as she calls it, at the nation's collective dream of making a Mad Max game. We researched the production and reception histories of these games, as I said, with Helen Stuckey interviewing developers to ensure that we've got the records that will support future research. And there are entries on our website on these game titles, similar to our 1980s popular memory archive. It's worth mentioning, perhaps, given Jack's introduction, that is a key part of what we think it is to do this sort of participatory history. We were receiving uploads from people who remembered playing these games when they first came out in the 1980s, not just anecdotes, but ephemera, photographs, and a whole range of other artifacts, including, fan art, etc. And we think this is a really, important undertaking and part of what it is to do such a project. So I want to add, we're not just about the software, but the software is an important part of it, and so that's what I'm going to talk about today. So the fourth aim, or the third and the fourth aim of our projects were really the technical end of things, and a key outcome for the project has been to stabilise these legacy digital artefacts so they're not lost, and to make them available through emulation. This, of course, requires the creation of disk images from obsolete media carriers, which can then be run in emulation. Emulation, as most of you would know, simulates the function of obsolete systems and is a key digital preservation strategy for accessing legacy-born digital content. So the game files are carried variously on 5.25 and 3.5-inch floppy disks, CD-ROMs and cartridges, each requiring their own special imaging and digitisation tools. In the Digital Heritage Lab at Swinburne University, which is where I'm sitting at the moment, you can see Cindy's boxes of all sorts of things behind me. Cindy Moyer, our software preservation specialist. This is some of her kit that she has set up here. On the left, you can see Cryoflux with 3.5 and 5.25 disk drives, and on the right, the applesauce, which is a floppy disk controller for imaging a whole variable speed vintage Apple disk drives. Hobbyists have also created a range of tools that we used in this project, particularly for imaging gaming cartridges, and we exhibited some of these in an exhibition at ACME, some of the hardware that is actually used in the process of preserving games, including, I think, a Joey Joe Bags version 3 in the cabinet here. And more recently, we've started using a grease weasel also for floppies. So we were keen to evaluate emulation as a service infrastructure for the 1990s games that we were working with. After one of our team, computer scientist Dr. Denise de Vries, spent a couple of sabbaticals at Freiburg working with the team who were developing it. For those of you who aren't familiar with EASY, Emulation as a Service Infrastructure, it was first rolled out in North American universities led by Yale University, with a networked version developed with the support of the Sloan and Mellon Foundations. EASY packages up open source emulators and enables users to configure legacy computer environments that artifacts require to run in, and to share such configured legacy software environments across the network with other users. It thus offers considerable economies of effort in configuring environments which can be used and reused and shared by others on the network. Our other partner organisation, AARNet, AARNet stands for Australia's Academic and Research Network, so they run the internet between universities in Australia. And AARNet were very interested in trialling EASY to see if it might be a service that they could offer to subscribers. They were to provide the technical expertise, acting as the centralised EASY service provider, providing cost-efficient hardware utilisation, lightening the technical workload for the GLAM institutions, which would have reduced institutional infrastructure requirements. And we hoped that we might be able to find a sustainable business model independent from grant funding for running such a network. So in conjunction with our partner organisation ACME, we exhibited a selection of these game titles from this 50 that we worked on in the gallery. In 2022, we showed 6 vintage Australian games of the 1990s as part of the permanent exhibition, Story of the Moving Image. And it was really lovely. We didn't exhibit them in EASY for a range of different reasons. We've got some footage of some of the games that were shown on the nightly news one night. This is an Aussie rules footy game. So again, very local content, very much local content driven. The games were run in standalone emulators in the exhibition, partly because, for a range of different reasons. The project and the games, particularly the PC games, really put EASY through its paces, as we knew it would. Emulating a stable environment like a Game Boy is one thing, and it worked quite well for that, but emulating 90s games for PCs is quite another. Each game has quite different requirements for the configuration and performance of the PC, and things like memory configuration and drivers became very important. And some of the challenges showed up, particularly in the poor performance of drive-in games. And my colleagues, Helen Stuckey and Cindy Moyer, presented on this at DIGRA in 2023. This is one of the reasons, but another reason was that, for instance, Easy doesn't have emulators for every system yet in it. So we were showing an Amiga game, and there is no open source Amiga emulator included in Easy at the moment. So this is another reason why we went for freestanding emulators. However, the facility to make content available via a web page is a strength, and we built a pathway so that many of these games are available for researchers, archivists, and the general public to play on their own devices while they're inside the ACME building, connected to the Wi-Fi. And this is a short video showing you the catalogue of games that are available for play when you're inside the building. When you take your own laptop along, you can actually play these games over Easy. So this is a considerable number, not the full 100 games that we've worked on over the course of the two Play It Again projects, but a sizable number. As well as these non-traditional research outputs, we're in the process of publishing more traditional journal articles on this work, so look out for those in coming months and years. It takes a while. All right, so the emulation of computer games has become one of the most visible forms of software preservation. It's sort of a gateway practice, introducing broader audiences to the concept. We were very aware that media arts of the era posed many of the same challenges. And so in 2017, I proposed a second linkage project at the same time as Play It Again, which fortuitously was also funded, called Archiving Australian Media Art, towards a method and a national collection. This we've talked about as the sister project to Play It Again, except that this project worked with a larger consortium of GLAM organisations. So we had ACME again, with the Art Gallery of New South Wales, the State Library of South Australia, and Griffith University Art Museum. And three of these four GLAM organisations took the archive of a media arts organisation in their state. They were in Victoria, Experimenta, in New South Wales, Deluxe Media Arts, and in Adelaide, the Australian Network for Art and Technology, or ANAT. And I'm sorry, this is a slide with all the organisations. So you can see it's actually, there's a lot of people involved at the various organisations. These are the media arts collections that we're talking about, and this is the academic team. And these are the collections that I was just referring to. So State Library, South Australia, Australian Centre for Moving Image, Art Gallery of New South Wales, each with a collection that they're focused on. And these are really significant, taken together, particularly significant set of archives. So the aims of this project included, again, providing emulated access to artworks to researchers in reading rooms. And because we ran the two projects in tandem, we were able to, capitalise on some of the things that we learned from one in the other. And the learning didn't just flow one way. There were some lovely synergies and some unexpected serendipitous discoveries along the way. In short, utilising Easy, we showed that other software-dependent artefacts could also be emulated and made available, and in some cases with better results than some of the 1990s games. And all in all, we emulated around 32 media artworks from the 1990s, and I have a video that I will show you of an artwork that is a Macromedia Director piece running in OS9 by Nora Newmark and Maria Miranda, called Shock in the Ear. And there should be some sound for this. This is an example of the desktop there. You can see there's a range of artworks. Cindy's been experimenting with installing a number on the one desktop.
ear. A shock in the ear. Shock. In the ear. In the ear.
Because the physical body is so involved in movement, when you experience time, it's how you experience movement as well. It's not a mind memory. That's why you think it's memorized in your cells, in your body. Because it's not to do with things you necessarily see or think about.
Memorized in my cells.
Okay, so we are in the process of publishing outcomes from this project as well. There are a couple already out, and our 2023 report tells some of the story. I've got a slide at the end with a bunch of references that you'll be able to revisit if you're interested. So whilst Play It Again was the more technically ambitious project, in some ways the learning from the Media Arts project about working consortially was more significant in terms of what was to come. Conceptually, we initially considered the Media Arts Consortium significant because it pointed to the way that media arts collections are distributed nationally. And together with my colleague Denise de Vries, we conducted a survey of holdings in Australian collecting institutions of media artworks, because there is no union catalogue at the moment for galleries in Australia. And so it's very difficult to know who has what, and are there overlaps, and who might be doing preservation of a particular artist's work. This is important information to have. And so we were, from quite an early moment, before the UK's Towards a National Collection project was underway, we were conceiving of this project as really understanding media arts collecting in a distributed national collection kind of sense. And after mapping, collecting across the nation as a sort of corollary to this thinking, another point of significance emerged from as we worked with this consortium of GLAM staff, librarians, archivists, conservators and others, to train them in imaging discs and building emulation environments in easy. The skills transfer and the beginnings of a community of practice across cultural institutions became, I think, one of the most significant outcomes of this project. It was really the beginnings of a coordinated national cross-sector approach, something that had long been called for if we were to avoid losing access to digital heritage. And a published article that we put out, I think in 2022, details some of this. It's called Archiving Australian Media Arts Project Overview. We talked about how the sharing of collections data from that Media Arts in Australian Collections database, which you can find online on our website, was extremely insightful for staff at participating organisations. They were really very excited to see what was in other people's collections and how it complemented their own, and how it might enable them to focus preservation efforts. It's worth keeping in mind that these are quite different types of institutions. I mentioned the organisations that were involved. They are a state library, a state gallery, a university gallery, and a moving image museum. But in some sense, they were all providing context for each other's work. The project also built greater confidence, I think, amongst these collecting organisations that they could indeed deal with the challenges of software-dependent artworks and other born digital objects. And I don't think there was really that confidence there before. They hoped they could, but coming together, they realised they really could. And it led, for instance, the Art Gallery of New South Wales to accept the deposit of another significant media arts archive, that of the 1996 exhibition Burning the Interfaith, curated by Mike Leggett and Linda Michael at the Museum of Contemporary Art in Sydney. So some of the key generalisable benefits of this project were its consortial approach and its extension of an explicit invitation to organisations to view their in-house efforts as part of a larger nationally distributed and cooperative collecting and preservation effort. And partner organisations' feedback was that this framing was a key benefit to staff whose dedicated focus within their institution can obscure awareness of what else is happening externally. Insights were shared into institutional thinking and strategic planning, with cross-disciplinary conversations occurring between key staff, not all of whom knew each other prior to the project starting. So in a sense, you've got those silos of institutions, but you've also got silos of particular professional groupings. You know, the librarians go to the library conference and the archivists go to the archival conference, etc. So the project has not only provided a way to pool efforts and knowledge, but the consortial approach has boosted awareness of what others are doing, fostering a strong sense that staff are working collaboratively across institutions to conserve the history of media arts in Australia. So together, Play It Again and Archiving Australian Media Arts allowed us to trial and hone a method for working with a distributed GLAM consortium, with a supportive research team engendered between organisations and researchers sharing problems, strategies, and celebrating successes. The two linkage projects have laid the foundation for work with more varied software domains, effectively seeding the next project I want to talk about, the Australian Emulation Network, a research infrastructure project for which I first gained funding in 2021 and then again in 2024 for a phase 2. We call it AusEasy for short. These grants have funded the rollout of this network, which now supports some 40 organisations learning to use the shared digital infrastructure of Easy, beginning with many of our major GLAM institutions and complementing those from the two linkage projects who were keen to continue working with more and different types of content. The network consists of both large and small organisations, right down to, local history societies, which, don't have an infrastructure budget or even an IT team, but all of which qualify as libraries or archives under the Australian Copyright Act, including university archives. And we've been teaching them how to image obsolete media and how to use the shared digital infrastructure of Easy. So here's the blurb about what we said we were going to do. And these are the aims of the first project. And just to show you that we have moved on beyond media arts as well, I've got some architectural plans to show you, from opening in Windows 98 in Minicad in Easy from my colleague Kirsten Day, who was a chief investigator at Melbourne University and architectural historian. So I want to tell you a little bit about the AusEasy model. It's legal under Australian law for libraries and archives, which includes museums and galleries and university archives, to share preserved software for research purposes. It's called the research exception in the Copyright Act, section 113J. But few people in universities or GLAM institutions had the skills required to actually make use of that provision. There's been a need for training in these organisations. And so our collaborative model involves training in disk imaging and building legacy computer environments, offered by our software preservation specialist, Cindy Moyer, who acts as a resource for the entire network. Moyer hosts regular supportive technical Zoom calls, she calls them virtual office hours, for the community of practice to ensure that staff who are tasked with preserving complex digital artefacts are not isolated in their institution, but are part of a knowledgeable and friendly community who are learning together and to whom they can turn with any problems. The thriving community of practice has built confidence amongst participating organisations who are now more willing to collect complex digital artefacts because they know they can preserve them and make them accessible. So these grants that we are currently on the second, just about to finish the end of the first one, and we're some months into the second one. We are providing access to staff to be trained and to skill up in preserving disks and configuring environments for rendering complex digital artifacts. Really, this has been leading the way in opening up and building born digital collections across the country, I think it's fair to say. So where are we now? We are, I think it's fair to say that this has been an unqualified success, building the emulation infrastructure in Australia and the people infrastructure. And I'll say a bit more about that. But very much infrastructure is understood as not just tech, but people and skilled people. We have tightly focused content domains. No, I was saying people, photos of people standing around computers, smiling and laughing. Tightly focused content domains. We said in the first project that we would target these 5 domains, obviously extending the work that we had already done in media arts and games, but also moving into the other creative industries, architecture and industrial design, AR, VR, and web and pre-web networking. I would say AR, VR is probably the one that we have made the least progress on at this point. But I can show you some cool web stuff if you're interested afterwards. And what I think is interesting is about this project is that these collections or these archives that are being targeted have been nominated by the researchers who want to use them in their research. So it's quite an interesting model. You've got chief investigators who are design historians, media arts historians, architectural historians, game historians, etc., working in conjunction with the GLAM institution. So it's yielded really far-reaching benefits for researchers, their teams, and the broader research and archival communities. And I think the large number of GLAM organisations participating speaks to the project's importance for collecting institutions in Australia. There continues to be considerable excitement and appetite for using the AusEasy infrastructure. We have an active community of practice which ensures that learning is shared, including with some overseas observer organisations from New Zealand. There are also currently some frustrations, of course. The lack of dynamic scaling in the original Easy architecture means that we are waiting to be able to make content more widely available. Once we can deploy the successor version of the platform, which is in development, that should be resolved. The potential exists for a kind of hybrid cloud deployment so that core infrastructure can reside on premises if that's desired, and then it can kind of cloud burst out to public cloud providers if there's a heavy load. There has been lots of consultation and thought put into the features, and so the next gen Easy should be a really great platform, and we all can't wait to get on it. So that's kind of where we're at now. I thought to finish up, it might be useful to talk about some of the building blocks that have gone into this project. I mean, I've talked about sort of the scaffolding, I guess, of the projects across the 2 linkage projects and then leading to the wider use of Easy in Australia. But there are a number of components that it could be broken down into, which it might be useful to lay out for anybody who's interested in going down such a path. Because looking ahead, I hope and anticipate that there will be more Easy networks around the world and that we will be able to see much more born digital cultural heritage preserved and made accessible in cultural institutions. For many years, I've been advocating the evangelist really for the importance of starting to preserve games and other types of content, even if the full end-to-end preservation solutions didn't yet exist. And so there are some things that you might want to consider if you're prepared to start ahead of the full pipeline coming online. And these are the building blocks, I think, for a future network. So think about the consortia. Think about others who face similar problems to what you do. It's a bit like coalition politics. You don't really have to agree on everything or adopt exactly the same practices. But an easy consortium enables conversations to happen, as I said, across disciplinary silos and across the different types of cultural institutions: galleries, libraries, archives, museums, university archives, small historical societies, and all the rest. In fact, in the most recent LEAF grant, we reached out to the Australian Museums and Galleries Association and brought them on as a partner organisation, and they brought 10 of their small organisations on board and did some of the work for us, because this centralised provision of an emulation capability by a service provider such as ARNet means that those organisations that don't even have their own IT departments can also gain benefit from this kind of shared digital infrastructure. So yeah, really going beyond your own patch to broaden your thinking and approaches can be helpful. You will need to consider gathering copies of software and building a software archive, or finding a software archive, perhaps. I guess it depends on what the current provisions are in particular jurisdictions. But we commenced some time ago gathering copies of the operating system, disks, and utility software that files need to be opened in. Often when content is collected, that hasn't been collected with it, and that can be a problem. But it needn't be. So our lab here started when my colleague Denise de Vries reached out to her colleagues in computer science at Flinders University, and they donated a whole bunch of their old computers and operating systems and, whatever they had in their cupboards at home. And we've all got that kind of stuff, or many of us do, laying around. So you will need that. Another part of the solution for us has been to find the software archives that do exist. So the National Library of Australia has an image software archive with, I think, a couple of hundred titles the last time I inquired. And we've been imaging a large software archive also from the Australian Computer Museum Society. So this is the kind of stuff that will come in handy, and I can show you what that looks like. The media, the disks holding content, are also going to need to be imaged. And that is really the urgent bit. That means people may need to learn how to create disk images of floppy disks, optical media, and probably some more obscure formats. And it's acknowledged that everyone is at different stages of maturity in their engagement with imaging and emulation. But there is good knowledge sharing around about this. And I'm thinking particularly at the moment of Leontine Talbloom's project Copy That Floppy at Cambridge University Library. It has really helped us here in Australia to run training where people are walked through the how-to, this is something that they need to know, and nobody had been teaching it before we were doing it. So it's not something that librarians, archivists, or conservators are learning in their degrees. It should be in the 21st century, in my humble opinion, but we've been stepping into the breach and doing that. And certainly that's an area in which we're considering perhaps offering a service if there is sufficient interest in the future. My colleague Cindy Moyer observes that people understand emulation better once they've used easy. Now, this might seem counterintuitive to people in this audience who are perhaps tech-savvy game preservationists, but we've been working with game professionals who I've just said are not being taught this in their degrees. So many of them came with a limited understanding. Once they've embraced, what it is to build a stack of, let's say, an operating system and then utility software and have their file open, in that they are much more able to go off and go, well, actually that emulator that I need isn't in easy. I'll go and set one up freestanding. And just to return to the point that I made earlier, last but not least, Easy and the Oz Easy network is very much an understanding of infrastructure as comprising technology and people. And so it's about building community. And some of the most exciting moments are really when people ask a question or are shown something from another member of the network that they have discovered. The librarians perhaps learning some tricks from the time-based media conservators or the government archivists, gleaning a cool insight that they can use in their work from someone else, from an unlikely source, which has been happening quite frequently on these Zoom calls. Everyone is learning together and can advance in their learning journey. So we share many common goals with efforts overseas and are keen to learn and share and collaborate where this makes sense, where there are opportunities to partner with other national or regional research and innovation systems. This is something that was called for as long ago as 2012 in the UNESCO Vancouver Declaration. And on the, I guess, back to the local level, around, infrastructure comprising technology and people, at the moment we are running an outreach project to, I guess, further that goal of making sure that people know how to do the imaging of discs, and so that significant content can be safeguarded. And so we're currently running an outreach project with artists, inviting them to come into our lab for training in how to use the disc imaging equipment to stabilise their media, because we know that much digital heritage material is out there in the community still, and most people lack the know-how to stabilise their media. So just like games, these artefacts are at risk and will be lost if they're not imaged soon. So I think I'll stop there. I'm really happy to take some questions now, or if something occurs to you after I've gone, because it's late here, then you're welcome to email me. I also have some references for you on the next slide to the pieces I've talked about. Regarding the EASY reference, I was talking to Wendy Hagenmeyer a couple of days ago at Yale. There have been some changes, so there's a lot of content about EASY online that has been looked after by the Software Preservation Network. It's being sunset this year, so she indicated that GitHub was perhaps not the best source for people who are not technical, but it is official, and so it's the place to go if you're interested in learning more. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you very much. This was absolutely fantastic. And we have questions already starting to roll in. One which I wrote and has been asked by someone else as well. What role has software piracy and associated community and the associated community contributed to the preservation of software and the emulation? Has there been kind of overlap with tools and things like that?
I'm not really sure on the question about software piracy. Overlap with tools. I know that there was some work going on in the Apple community some years ago that I was following on Twitter with the deprotecting of a whole lot of software, and they were using some of the same tools. I'm not aware that that there are issues at all there with software piracy and the tools.
I think what the question was getting at was the way that so much kind of consumer engagement with kind of classic games is done through legally shady emulation systems, but everything was constructed in-house for your project.
Well, I've mentioned some of the tools that we use.
Okay. Fantastic. Okay, next question.
It's a tricky question because we are presumably an international audience here, and everybody's working, I would say, within their own legal jurisdiction. And so, there's a kind of homogenizing assumption even in the question that Something that is illegal in one place will be illegal in another. And I think I think that it's understandable, the concern, but it's not the case.
Okay.
There are gradations across the world, and I'm keen to, I guess, share what the situation is here. I think we have quite reasonable provisions for doing software preservation, and it is legal to share software for research purposes. I would like the provisions to be much wider and much more encompassing than they are, but it's a reasonable place to start. It won't be the same everywhere, I'm aware, and so you probably would want to think about, well, what can you do with what is permitted in your jurisdiction, if indeed you want to work in that kind of paradigm.
Thank you. Okay. Next one. We've got Tom, who's going to be speaking later today. Thanks, Melanie, for the talk. It's really amazing what you've achieved. At one point, you mentioned a tool for determining dependencies from software. Was this something you developed as part of the project, or is it available anywhere else?
Yeah, thanks, Tom. I'm not really clued up on being able to answer that question. It was a tool that my colleague Denise de Vries was going to be supervising the development of, and so that's why it's there in an AIM, and subsequently she had to retire for health reasons, and somebody else wound up working on it, and I think she's still fiddling around with what they produced, but perhaps you could email me about that and I'll follow that one through with you. Yeah, it is a tool that will kind of grovel over a disk image. It's still coming, I think, is the best answer.
Okay, thank you. Then we've got from Emily. I'm personally curious on Australian oral and personal gaming histories, on how they are being preserved, if they are. Just wondering if you could speak to that, oral and personal gaming histories.
Oral histories are so that the interviews that were conducted with developers that I mentioned are held at the Australian Centre for the Moving Image. We also have a range of interviews from the first Play It Again project that are similarly at ACME. What else can I say? I have a whole lot as well based on my research. I think the handing on for secondary use of interviews is a real it is kind of not as well developed as it might be. I always try to include provision for doing that in my ethics applications, but it can be hard sometimes to find a repository that's willing to take them. So, yeah, I think probably the best answer is, they're scattered and it's probably not as well organised as it could be. It's something I've been aware of for a while. I actually think there's real potential for academic researchers, institutionally based researchers, having a conversation, some kind of outreach to fan researchers who go out and do some amazing interviews and have gotten some amazing access to people from the industry, but they're operating on a different set of practices than what I would need to adhere to, and that causes some challenges. So it would be great if they were lodged somewhere and then they could be used as archival materials. That would probably get around some of those problems. So it's definitely an area for more work to happen in.
Perfect. And then another question about how you think Australia's kind of local identity affects games preservation efforts there. like kind of you've mentioned the legal context, the kind of the government's relationship to the games industry, kind of how unique do you think your experience has been doing this in Australia?
Oh, that's a really interesting question. I'm not sure how to answer that one. I'd probably have an answer more on the size of Australia. Cindy Moyer, my colleague, worked on the first easy fostering a community of practice project in the US when she was at Living Computers Museum and Labs in Seattle. And her comment working with the organisations in Australia is that, Australia's just the right size. It's small enough that you can talk to all the different state library people, for instance, but it's big enough that, there's enough organisations around to, I guess, make a critical mass. It's not like the US where there's, 50 plus states and, it's impossible to get across everybody. So I'm not quite sure what to say, except that it was, I guess, the landing of the first, that we managed to get the first Play It Again project funded in 2011, I think surprised us all. And it was, I think, the New Zealanders coming on board that probably got us over the line. So it was, I started my first full-time academic job in New Zealand and did pilot work there, and then I came back to Australia and got the Play It Again project up and running here. It was a combination of people, who got it off the ground, who were in the right place at the right time. So very fortuitous. Helen Stuckey was working as a games curator at ACME, and we were going to put it in with just ACME. And then right at the 11th hour, the New Zealand Film Archive people reached out and said, "You couldn't help us with some work on game history, could you?" And I went, "Well, have I got a project for you?" And I think probably two organisations being prepared to put their name to it at that time made a difference, because at that point everybody was very concerned that this might be seen as not a good use of taxpayers' funds, etc. But having two organisations ready to back each other up, two moving image museums, I think probably strengthened everybody's arm. Just gave a sense of encouragement. There was never any criticism, but we were aware it was possible.
But John, you can talk a little bit to the UK equivalent you mentioned.
Thank you so much, Jack. I just want to say, first of all, I want to say very, very grateful for everybody for bringing this together. And I'm here representing the National Video Game Museum I also in the UK. But I also want to say that I'm really grateful to Emily for asking the previous question, because it was actually the question that was on my mind as well. What is it that has specifically enabled this incredibly inspiring work to happen in the context and time that you're working in? And I'm really grateful for the answer. To speak to the UK context, we're not as big as the US, but we have multiple very large scale cultural institutions that have particular perspectives on video games as technologies, as social history, and our own museum that tries to work with video games really on their own terms and with the communities. And I just want to say, Melanie, the work that you've presented, that your consortia has put together is just hugely inspirational and just represents what can be done. And I really hope that something similarly collaborative, cross-disciplinary, and ambitious can be achieved in other countries, including the UK.
Thanks, John. Lovely to see you.
Thanks.
I've got another question in the chat. So Ross Fifield says, without wishing to suggest that practitioners engage in anything ethically compromising, are there opportunities for international collaborations where game preservation and collection partnerships may be conducted on a co-located basis and allow partners to collectively preserve games in a partner jurisdiction, but which may not be possible on their own? I think responding to the questions about legality at the beginning.
I think all sorts of creative thinking is called for, and it sounds like you're going down a great path there, Ross. Feel free to reach out.
Fantastic. We've got another one from Patricia Falco. Melanie, how did the work with media art impact the work with video games? Were there big surprises or differences that came up?
Yeah, good question. I think the I think it is pretty much what I've talked about, Patricia. The consortial aspect really gelled in the media arts project in a way that it wasn't necessary for it to in the Play It Again project, because we were just working in this second project with ACME. It kind of happened serendipitously, because the project started in 2020. I moved universities, and it had been awarded and was supposed to start in 2018. But there was a delay because it takes a long time to transfer these things. And we met for a meeting in Sydney in 2019, late 2019. Thank God, all of us face to face, because by March 2020, we were in lockdown for a very long time. And so the Zoom meetings started off being a kind of, we better do it this way. And then we had previously planned and budgeted to bring everybody together for a face-to-face meeting once a year. But it actually turned out to be much more efficient to have quarterly Zoom meetings and to have the chit-chat kind of before and after, and the loosely scripted agenda, allowing enough space for people to just have the less formal conversation about what was going on in their institutions, and the passing of knowledge back and forth, which is really it didn't so much affect the Play It Again project, but it's gone on to influence the way that we've set up the emulation network, virtual office hours, complete with people, having the pet pictures or the cat walk across the desk, or all those kind of memes, I suppose they've become now, of what a Zoom meeting is. It was quite astonishing. It's in the article where I reflect on that, the project overview piece. So I'm not sure there's much more I can say about that. But
thank you.
Fantastic. Okay, finally, I keep having my question to ask, but other people keep putting in ones in the chat. So I finally get my chair's question, which is kind of, it's a bit, just wondering about the relationship with kind of creative industries and the sort of, you've mentioned about the outreach to artists to come in and have work preserved with the media arts projects. But I was just wondering about the kind of the preserved material as sites of kind of inspiration or kind of creative reflection, like whether there's been any kind of work in building, artistic or game content out of the material that's been worked with.
Yes, that's something that one of the chief investigators on the LEAF grant, Professor Simon Biggs, in Adelaide, at Adelaide University, as it's now known, is very interested in. So he worked with Macromedia Director in the 90s and is quite a power user, I would say, of that software. And he is very focused on the potential for going in and grabbing assets from particular artworks in order to reuse them or do something else with them. And, wanting to make that available to other artists who might want to do that. I think there is some, if I may go on, I think there's some really interesting differences between what it is to preserve a game and what it is to preserve an artwork or another form of, cultural product, like, let's say, architecture or design documents. It's easier in a way if we're talking permissions to be dealing with an individual creative producer who in many cases will own their content. It's not tied up in heaps of challenging layers of permissions. But it's apparently an issue in the design and architecture industries that content can be quite challenging because of the contractual arrangements around it. So I know some of my design historian and architectural historian colleagues are very focused on that. So this platform has enormous potential for use in a range of industries. And we actually had the architects, the Institute of Australian Architects, as a partner on the first LEAF grant. There's some discussion as to whether or not an architect who wishes to renovate a building and needs to go back and get the plans for that, as to whether that would constitute research for the Libraries and Archives research exception to come into play. I don't have much more to say about that, but I just draw, I think there are some interesting lines there around the different kinds of cultural artifacts and how easy or not so easy it is to secure cooperation or indeed rights to different types of cultural product.
Great. Thank you very much. And I think that's all we've got time for. Thank you very, very much, Melanie, and thank you for coming in the middle of the night. Yes, there was a question in the chat a little bit earlier about slides. Would you be happy with us sharing your slides with everyone in the kind of roundup material from the event?
I'll probably have to take that on advice and look at them for rights reasons.
Yeah.
So perhaps we can talk about that afterwards.
Fantastic. All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It's been lovely.
So we're going to have a 5-minute break now, loading screen, as someone mentioned. And then we're going to come back in for our first panel session.